Hi everyone out there on YouTube. Okay, so this is part 2 of the two-part series on ESC music, BL Heli 32, and in this one I'm going to split it up into two sections. The first one, bit of basic musical theory, because doing this over the last week or so I've realized that my music reading isn't as good as I thought it was. And there's a few things that you can download, such as what's showing on the screen at the moment, and I'm just going to run through these, but it's up to you to look up your own resources, find out what you need to suit your level. If you can already read music well, you might be able to skip the whole of the first section in this video, and I'll put a note in the comments when I've finished how long that is, so you know what point to skip to. So, writing to the BL Heli music editor, you need to convert normal music into some code that the computer recognizes. But before then, you need some music to work with. So here's the basics of some musical theory to start with. I'll run through it fairly quickly because I've got pictures up ready to go. Your basics, if you just compare it to piano rather than any other instrument, it makes it easier generally to work these things out, and most piano music is a bit less complex to read than other types of music. So we've got at the top flats and sharps, so all the black notes are flats and sharps with me rubbish green arrows next to them. We've got all of the other main letters, main keys are denoted by letters running from A through to G. The keyboard doesn't go any further than G in the alphabet, and if you go further up from any of these to the next flat or sharp note, so you go from A, for example, here where my cursor is, up to the black note, that will be A sharp, or it can be B flat. So B flat and A sharp are the same thing. You're going to need to know that because the music editor only recognizes sharps. You can't type in a flat. So if you look at a piece of music and it's got a key signature which has got flats in it, you're going to have to write that down. Then you're going to have to work out what the equivalent of that flat is as a sharp instead, because that's what you're going to have to type into the music editor. So you've got two different clefs, as they're called. So the higher sounding notes are on what's called the treble clef, which I've put a circle and a rubbish arrow down there. So that's your treble clef notes, which is normally played with the right hand on the piano from middle C, noted here in red, upwards. And on the bass clef, which is this symbol in green, circle with the arrow, you've got the lower notes, which are normally played with the left hand, and normally those are from middle C downwards. Okay, so we can close that one off. So if you look at a piece of music, here's an example. There's a few things you need to look at when you start converting this over. I've done a few drawings at the top here because this was a nice, simple, basic piece of music, and it's got a few elements in that you need. This symbol here, the sharp sign, or you might recognize it as a hashtag, but it's actually music, a sharp sign, that denotes that any note on that particular line, so the top line of treble clef, if we go back to the previous picture, which I've now gone and closed, you'll find that is F. So any Fs in this piece are going to be sharp. So if you write the music down, looking at the notes on the stave here, and you find an F, just always put it down as an F sharp, because that's what it's going to be. So that's called the key signature. So that sort of decides whether it's happy music, sad music, moody music, you know, whatever. The time signature, which is this 4/4 here, shows there's 4 beats in each bar. So when you're working out your spaces and you're typing this into the music editor later, you can double check anything you've written by making sure that on each of these bars, whatever total you've put in of fractions adds up to 4. So that's 4, easy peasy on this one, 4 single beats. Sometimes you will have notes that look like these I've drawn at the top. So these are half notes linked together, which means you won't put any pause in between them, and a half note on its own will be like one of these but with a little tail at the end, and that's called a crotchet. If you've got a note like this one here, which has got a hole rather than filled in top, that is 2 beats. So filled in 1 beat, not filled in 2 beats, and if it hasn't got the leg on it at all and it's just a little circle with a hole in it, that's 4 beats. But you can look a lot of this stuff up yourself, but there's a few basics. So let's close that one down and see what's next. So in the next one, this is something I'm going to go into programming in a bit. Happy birthday to you, but a really simple format, no sharps, no flats, but I've just noted on here that those two are both half beats because they're tied together. These are single beats, and that one's 2 beats. So that's like the other bit we've looked at just now. There's other things on here, like this little wiggly symbol is a pause, and it's a pause of 1 beat. If you have a little block inside the whole bar like that, that's a pause of the whole bar, which in this case is 3 beats because it's 3/4 time music. So if you ever see that squiggly line introduced into any music partway through all of the notes here, you're going to need to put in a pause when you program it in. But more about that later when we get onto some more complex music. That's just a copy of what I've just done, so I can get rid of that one as well. And that was the original before I did anything to it. Okay, so we can get rid of all that. So now the actual programming part of it. Okay, we're back. Here's section 2. So this is where we go into a bit more detail about the actual code itself. So you've got some basic musical knowledge from the first part, hopefully, and if not, you can get some paper and pen out, look at some music and start writing those things down. When you go into the Heli 32 and you put your cursor over the box on the music editor, you get this dialog box come up. It doesn't stay up there for long. I tried this earlier, it kept disappearing, it was really annoying. So what I've done is I've managed to find it on a site online, and it's this text box at the top here. So it tells you what all of that code means. So you've got 3 main elements to it. There's actually 4, but the 3 main ones are the note, which will be C, C sharp, D, etc. Taking note of what I said earlier on about sharps and flats. So you can't put in D flat. It doesn't recognize the flat symbol. You have to put it in as C sharp. So I tend to have a bit of paper in front of me when I'm doing this transposing of the music, write it down as I go along, and then if there's anything that's flats, convert it to sharps, and then type it up into a text box. So you've got your basic notes, that's the first element in the code. Then the second one is the octave you're working with, and there's 4 of them, 4, 5, 6 and 7, 4 being the lowest, 7 the highest. The length of the notes, 1 beat, half a beat, quarter a beat, eighth of a beat, but you don't have to have the 1 over, because there's a little box down here on Heli, and if you click that, it shows you the whole fraction. You unclick it, you just get in the bottom half of the fraction, which is a lot tidier and easier to write. Next part of it is when there's any pauses. Go into that in more detail in a minute, because there are pauses written into some pieces of music, and sometimes you do this without pauses and it just doesn't sound right, so you have to add your own. And the pauses have values of fractions, the same as the note length, and you can put in just the bottom half of the fraction, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, etc, etc. So that's the basics of the code. So how it looks when you've typed it in is something like this, which looks a little bit of a jumble at the minute, but we'll go through that note by note in a sec. I'll just get rid of Heli for a minute. So I've picked out this nice easy bit of music here, nothing fancy in it. Happy birthday to you, no sharps or flats in the key signature, pretty straightforward, because you need to start somewhere. And this is how I started, and then I moved on to some more complex stuff later, as I'll tell you near the end of the video. So the first 2 notes here in the treble clef, the top half, those are both G's, and they have a value of a half a beat each because they're tied together. We're going to work with octave 4 to start with. We'll start with the lowest one and then work our way up. So that first note will be a G, octave 4, length of the note is 2 because it's a half beat. Next one is a G again with octave 4, that's the same right the way across, another half beat, so that's 2. Next one is an A, again in octave 4, otherwise it's going to sound really strange. That one's got a value of 1, and we repeat that for the G. For the C, if you put that in as a 4, it plays the C at the very bottom of the treble clef, not the one at the top. And when you listen back to it, you think, oh, that sounds wrong. What does that sound wrong? Because on the suite editor, it splits the octaves so that as soon as you go past G, it goes into the next octave up, because it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc. So if you just type it all in on the same one, all in on 4 to start with, which is what I did with this, and I'll show you that as an example now actually. We'll put that in as, leave that as 4, just to see what happens. The last note is a B, and as it's a 2-beat note, we just type it in twice. So it'll just play it for twice as long. So if we take that little bit of code there, copy that, stick it into our music editor, and what it will sound like is this. So in there you can hear a bum note. Play it again. And the bum note is this C is supposed to be higher than the G before it. So if we change that 4 to a 5, then it will play like this. That sounds more like happy birthday to you. Now that's with no pauses in there. Sometimes music has pauses in, as I told you earlier on, with a little squiggly line, and you can look these things up yourself when you actually got a piece of music in front of you and wonder what the hell it all means. Sometimes you need to put pauses in to make it sound right, because that all sounds a bit sort of all blended together. So what I've done is I've just typed that out again, but after every note I've put in a pause, and it's only a fairly small pause. So we've got the note, the 4 for the octave, the 2 for the length of the note. Then I've put in a pause of a quarter of a note on any of those notes. I've put in a pause of a half a note on the longer notes. And this was just experimentation to see what it sounds like. No pause on the last 2 because we want them as one long note. So what that will sound like, all I've done is literally added pauses into it. If I just copy that and paste that in there. And they think, yeah, it sounds better, but it's a bit slow. So what do we do to change that? We change this general length here. So this is a speed up, slow down factor. So if I change that from 8, which is the default, to say 6, that's more like the speed we might want it to be. So that's your basics. That's pretty much all there is to it. What you then need to do is to take that and put it into the next ESC, but maybe change the octave on each of them, go up one. So every time you've got a 4 after the note, and it is easier with these, I find, to type them out like this, with spaces in between each bit of code for that one note, because it's easier to alter stuff later. So if you copy and paste that whole thing into ESC2, and you, well, let's just do that now, because it might not take too long. Just copy that, paste it into ESC2, and everywhere that there's a 4, we change it to a 5. Everywhere else, just go back through that one, there's a 5, so we'll change that to a 6. As I explained earlier on, that one had to be higher just because of the octaves and how they work. That one's a 4, change that to a 5. That one's a 4, change that to a 5, and that one's a 4, change that to a 5. And what that will sound like now is, if I turn music on and change my interval back to 6, my length, sorry. So it's just playing it higher. But the trick with this, well, not the trick, but the whole point of doing these individually is you can put different music, even different notes that complement each other, harmonies, and you can see that on written music, into the 4 ESCs, but it will play them all together. So now that's playing both octave 5 and octave 4 at the same time. So it's like having two hands on a keyboard. That's really basically it. So see what you can do with that. Have a look at some music. Once you get to the stage where you can start to separate the right hand and the left hand on a piece of music, and like take for example, nope, not the happy birthday one, David, get rid of that. I looked up earlier on, or I got the sheet music out rather, for City of Stars from La La Land, because it was just a tune that I had in my head, and I split up the two parts of it. So how that looks, if I just import that in, there's a lot of sharps in this, and there's quite a lot of work involved in getting the right hand and the left hand in sync, and there is actually a natural pause in the music, so this is all sort of running together apart from one little point when we get to a pause, which is, yeah, I can't remember, it's somewhere in the middle of this code. But how that sounds, we might have this on one hand, so that's playing the tune, but then the next ESC is playing what the left hand on the piano would be playing, which is, and if you put them together, it sounds a lot more full. So that's the sort of thing you can achieve with a bit of work on this, but there's your basics of how to do it. So I hope you find that helpful.